Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Kellen with Apex Archery. I'm going to start off today's review with a question for you. Do you ever find yourself looking at the assortment of just aluminum or just carbon fiber offerings out on the hunting bow market today and thinking, yeah, those are just a little bit too boring for me? Well, then today's bow might just be the ticket. We've got in the brand new Form from Prime Archery using what they are calling AST, or Advanced Structures Technology, a combination of aluminum and carbon fiber all in one longer riser. Can't wait to get this bow under test. Let's get into it. All right, welcome back everyone. Very excited to be testing the Form from Prime, not least because this is the first time that we've had the opportunity on this channel to get a Prime bow in for testing, and what a great year to do it considering the extensive changes that they've made to the riser by way of that AST, or Advanced Structures Technology, with the bonded carbon fiber tubes here comprising a piece of that otherwise aluminum riser. Before we go any further, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel immensely, and I love bringing these very in-depth bow reviews to all of you. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this bow for this year. This is a longer axle-to-axle 34-inch ATA spec bow. It is coming in with a claimed system weight of 4.1 pounds and a brace height of 6 1/4 inches. The draw lengths on this cam system will go between 26.5 out to 30.5 inches, and it does use individual modules to accomplish all of those different draw lengths. And the MSRP on this bow is $1,595. Before we go any further, I do want to pause for just a moment, give a quick shout out and thank you to my home shop and effectively the sponsor of this channel, and that is Bear Creek Archery in Inglewood, Colorado. A multi-generational family-owned shop, again here in the Front Range in Colorado. I trust them for all of my archery needs, and they are again providing us with all of the bows that we have in for testing so far this year. If you are in Colorado or passing through, please go say hi to my friends over at Bear Creek Archery for all of your archery needs. All right, let's dive in. Before we take this thing outside and begin actually shooting the bow, I do want to go ahead and verify some of the specs coming out of the factory. We're going to start with that axle-to-axle measurement. So if I go from the center of the axle there to the same on the other side, this one is coming in exactly 1/8 of an inch long. So that's giving us an updated ATA for this particular bow of 34 1/8 inches. Next, let's go ahead and look at that brace height. And again, we are measuring here from the deepest part of the throat of the grip to the center of that string. And this is coming in just a little bit longer than claimed as well by exactly 1/8. So that's going to give us 6 3/8 of an inch on this particular bow. Now let's look into the riser length. Anybody who's been with us before on this channel knows that I prefer a longer riser, especially relative to that axle-to-axle, because I think of the riser as my vertical orientation stabilizer when I am on target and at full draw, really keeping a lot of the mass of the system, the limbs, the cam assembly out away from the shooting position where I grip. So we are going to measure here to the last point that the actual limb pocket here supports those limbs. And on this particular bow, that is coming in at exactly 30 inches. So relatively average, I would say, for bows within this category and within this ATA designation. That gives us a riser to axle ratio of 87.9%. Next, let's go ahead and check into the reflex. Remember, the shorter the reflex measurement on the bow, which is really from that pivot point or the point where the limbs are last supported by the riser and the limb pocket itself, the shorter that measurement, the less impact that torque in our grip is going to have on final arrow placement on target. So if we find again that pivot point and measure once more to the deepest part of the throat of the grip, this one is coming in at exactly 2 3/8 of an inch. So, modest, maybe getting to the longer side of reflex for most bows that we're seeing. All right, let's check into the system weight. They are claiming that this is 4.1 pounds, and we do have this completely stripped down, really no tags or anything, no rest attached just yet. Using our hand scale here. That is coming in at 4.38 pounds. 4.38. So, you know, a little bit heavy. I would suppose that perhaps maybe if you were to remove these vibration dampeners in the limbs, maybe you could get it down closer. But I think everyone's really going to shoot with those on. So I think about 4.38 is going to be our go-forward weight for this particular bow. Last but not least, let's check into the width of the limbs. Again, many engineers from different companies claiming that if you have a wider overall limb stance, the more stable the bow is when you are at full draw. Using our calipers here, this is coming in at exactly 2 3/4 of an inch, so decently wide as far as that overall limb stance. All right, with that out of the way, I want to get this thing out on the range and get a couple of arrows through it to give you my very first shooting impressions of the Form from Prime. Very excited to put a few arrows through this, not least because I have very limited experience shooting any Prime bows, especially since they've moved away from that bizarre kind of 4-cam system that they were known for doing years and years ago. We have this set now to 30 inches and 70 pounds. I'm going to run a few 400 grain arrows through this bow and give you my very first shooting impressions. Relatively smooth draw, definitely something you can get used to. Feels like it stacks to peak weight maybe a little earlier than other bows. One thing that's immediately noticeable, it has a very kind of shallow string angle, especially for a 34-inch bow. A little bit of forward movement on the shot and a little bit of vibration in the riser, which again, we come to expect, especially as bows are getting lighter and lighter in overall weight, and they do, you know, get shot initially here, stripped all the way down. Yeah, smooth draw cycle now that I'm kind of getting accustomed to it. Let's feel that back wall. And if I kind of do extend, it is a little bit spongy. You can probably even see on the video there, if I put, you know, an extra, 10 to 20 pounds of pressure into that back wall, it will move. And relatively kind of whip-like sound. Not too loud. I would guess that this is probably going to come in near average when we actually get to our decibel meter reading a little bit later. One thing I do want to note though, they've done some really interesting things with their overall design, not just kind of this hybrid aluminum and carbon offering as far as the riser. They do something different by way of the entire geometry and even the way that they engineer the cam system in this bow that we'll talk more about later. They actually place the grip in the dead center of the bow, and they move the arrow up, and they do that by having different diameters for the top and the bottom cam to kind of compensate. So what they're claiming is that that is going to balance in hand really well, and I have to say it really does. You can see there I'm putting no pressure whatsoever on those front fingers, and that bow is just sitting kind of rock steady and even pretty level to my eye in my hand. So that does seem to work, although I do suspect that that shorter distance from, again, this D-loop up to the cam design here is what's giving me that really shallow string angle, especially again for the 34-inch axle to axle measurement. Settles into the back wall really nicely, kind of tapers into the valley, makes it very easy to draw smoothly and slowly. And as far as that grip, there's a little bit of texturing on the front, which I like because it gives me a repeatable reference point, but the grip profile in hand does feel a little rounded for my preference. And again, kind of that whip-like sound and a little bit of forward movement and vibration on the shot. All things considered, though, a really interesting and compelling offering from Prime, which again, balances right out of the box, as you can see, incredibly well. Let's take this thing back inside. I'm very curious to put it on the draw board and take a look at the dynamic specifications for this bow. All right, we are back inside. Now with the form pulled into our draw board, into that full draw position, so that we can get a sense for the dynamic specifications that are creating that shooting impression that we got out on the range. The first thing that I do like to look into is the string to string measurement, which will ultimately generate our angle here at the back of the bow. On this particular bow, we are measuring from the loadout point, or the last point where the string is really kind of supported and within the channels on the cam there, to the corresponding point at the other side of the bow. This one coming in at 34 1/8 of an inch, so identical to the axle to axle measurement that we had gotten initially. While we're talking about that point, one thing that a lot of bow manufacturers are addressing this year is something that they call dynamic brace height, which would be, in my opinion, the brace height from that kind of loadout point there, measured again to the deepest part of the throat of the grip. Some of the engineers from different companies are arguing that if you maintain or even extend that dynamic brace height, it gives you a longer lever here where the tension at the back of the string by way of that draw can actually help to fight torque that we might be applying at the grip in our hand. When we do measure on this particular bow, that is coming in at 5 5/8 of an inch, so it is getting a little bit shorter than the static brace height that we had initially seen. Next, let's talk about limb deflection. So when we measure the axle to axle measurement, when this is again on full draw, that is coming in at 30 1/2 inches, meaning that we are seeing a total limb deflection out of this bow of 3 5/8 of an inch. All of that is coming together to give us our string angle, which on this bow is actually coming in significantly more shallow than what we expect to see from a 34-inch platform. That is coming in at 33 1/2 inches. Again, remember, that is because they've actually moved the knocking point up from center. So there's actually a little bit of a larger diameter cam here, letting out more string and creating that more shallow string angle at the back of the bow. Moving to the front, let's go ahead and verify our actual draw length. And this bow, like those from many different manufacturers, is coming in about 1/4 of an inch long. So we are seeing that the actual draw length for this 30-inch mod on this cam assembly is actually coming in at closer to 30 1/4 inches. That gives us a total power stroke out of this platform of 22 1/8 inches. Now let's take a look at the draw force curve. As we can see, relatively smooth to draw, which is something that I had noted when we were out on the range. Part of that is because this actually climbs to peak weight around 35%, but it takes quite a while to get there. In fact, it's kind of a very linear progression all the way past that 25% mark and on to about 30 or 35%, where it does reach that true peak weight of 70 pounds. It then lets off very, very gradually for that middle portion of the draw force curve before ultimately beginning to taper off in about that last 25% and coming home in the valley and at the back wall in a very easy fashion. So overall, a very smooth drawing bow. Now let's take a look at the total area under the curve, or the amount of energy required by the archer to get through that actual power stroke. Ultimately, remember, the area under the curve should also represent the amount of energy that's being returned into the arrow to generate those speeds. This bow is coming in at 1,199.6 total inch-pounds across the draw cycle, again, when this is set to that 70-pound mark. That gives us a let-off of 13.1 pounds and an actual let-off percentage of 81.3%, which is very close to what was advertised, again, with this particular module configuration from the factory. Let's take this bow back out on the range, put a couple of weighted arrows through it to get a sense for our speeds. All right, we are stepping back out on the range now with the form, ready to get some speeds out of this bow. We do have this configured now and set to that 30-inch draw by way of the mod, 70 pounds of peak draw weight exactly. We are going to be shooting and looking for 336 feet per second. This first arrow is our 350 grain arrow, so now this bow is shooting at exactly ATA spec. Let's see what kind of speeds we get. That first shot going 324.1 feet per second. Next, we will shoot our 400 grain arrow. that going 302.7 feet per second. And finally is our airstrike here. This is coming in at exactly 450 grains. So again, getting quite a bit closer to what we might expect to see used in a field hunting application. That last arrow going 292.4 feet per second. All in, very respectable speeds coming out of the Prime, again, considering that it does have and store slightly less energy than what we're seeing as far as draw force curve analytics from this and other bows. Let's take this back inside and really break down the features of this riser. All right, we are back inside out of getting some very respectable speeds out on the range. Now it's time to kind of talk through summary and wrap up all of the additional features and design of this bow. Before we do though, it's important to note that we do like to go ahead and shoot a lot of 350 grain arrows at that 70-pound setting to get our actual average speed rating for these bows. This one did come in with a very tight and repeatable average of 323.5 feet per second. So that will be our go forward speed rating for the Prime form. Again, set to 30 inches, 80% let off, and in that 30% draw mod. All right, let's talk a little bit about the overall kind of design of this bow, because a lot of the different components and the way that Prime engineers their bows, it really kind of all goes together and comes together. The first thing to revisit and talk about is, again, that grip design and how that fits into the overall riser architecture. So again, they place that pivot point where you're actually making contact with the grip. That's actually the center point of the riser design, moving the nocking point a little bit north or a little bit closer to that top cam in this particular design. The other thing that they do, you can see here from the front, is they actually make sure that from that grip position, which is in line with the string and the string stop, the riser actually swerves out here equal amounts both top and bottom, meaning you should get even flex in the riser as kind of an engineered design feature, making this bow very, very reliable and tunable straight from the factory. Because of that different kind of nocking point, which again is closer to that top cam assembly, you can see they have different diameter and size cams, both top and bottom, with the smaller cam on the bottom and a larger cam on the top to compensate, so that again, that arrow draws back parallel to the ground. Really, really interesting design that we're not seeing from anyone else. The other thing that they are doing is they are doing kind of their inline design as far as how they're threading the cable to that actual cam assembly. So as that cable rolls over, the final cable attachment point, or where it's loading into the cam assembly, is getting closer to the center line of the actual cam itself. Again, supposed to really help with tunability right out of the box. If you do need to go ahead and tune this bow for any left-right paper tear issues, they do have 3 different sizes of shims that can be installed in different configurations to, again, affect that wheeling adjustment and fix any tunability issues that you may have to make sure that it's shooting straight. All right, as far as draw lengths, we had covered earlier kind of the range of draw length adjustment, and that is going to be accomplished with individual modules that can attach to this actual cam assembly, as well as additional modules that attach to those modules to affect the draw length. One of the nice things about seeing individual mods used on a cam assembly is that you're going to see kind of optimized efficiency and speeds at every different draw length. And again, then you can use those additional mods to impact the let off. I believe all of these bows are shipping with 85 and 80% options from the factory. And then as far as draw length adjustment, that is done by ordering kind of the poundage bow that you want. So you can get this in 40, 50, 60, 65, 70, and even 80 pounds. We see a lot of archers wanting kind of those higher poundage bows to get maximum speed out of those heavier arrows that they may be using for a hunting type application. So that is, of course, an option for Prime this year as well. And then, of course, from all of those peak draw weights that you might order, you can tune those within about 10 pounds by doing limb bolt turns and adjusting that poundage down from the peak weight coming directly from the factory. All right, now let's talk a little bit about vibration dampening. Really no additional kind of anything really built into the riser design itself, instead coming with those traditional vibration dampeners that we do see here kind of sandwiched between those limbs, pretty standard from just about everybody in the industry. I did feel just a little bit of vibration and hand shock when I was out on the range, but again, nothing that you're going to notice, especially once you begin to load this up with all of your various accessories. Yeah, I think that this is very middle of the road as far as kind of any forward movement or vibration, especially for a lighter weight bow. That said, as is always the case, I want to get a sense for the shot volume. So we do take this outside. We put our directional decibel meter exactly 3 feet from the horizontal shooting position of the bow and shoot a 400 grain arrow at that ATA spec. We did get 79 decibels. So right there, probably around kind of the average for what we're seeing from most of those longer axle-to-axle hunting bows, at least from those that we had tested last year. Not the quietest bow that we've had on test, and pretty far from being the loudest bow either. So right there in the middle of the road, pretty good job from Prime on that. Let's talk about some of the integration features and how are you going to attach various accessories to this particular bow. So Prime is offering you a machined Picatinny mount here, right in the front of the riser, giving you a single position where you can mount, again, a pick rail sight. Lots and lots of options from plenty of manufacturers, should be readily available at your local pro shop. And then on the back, they do have this double tapped and threaded mounting position if you do want to use that slider style sight as well. Similarly, very similar options actually for rest mounting interfaces as well. So on the back of the riser here, they have a double burger hole, allowing you to utilize those to get a really rock solid connection and interface for rests that will tolerate kind of utilizing 2 different screws there. And then they have gone to the trouble of machining into the back of the riser here a dovetail that will support any of the integrate style mounts that are, again, pretty readily available out on the market. Talking about the grip for a moment, not just the actual position of the grip, but the actual material and the profile. They are using this polymer here that I believe has some sort of a gel underneath it that they say was developed by NASA for insulation purposes, said to really kind of keep a lot of the heat dissipation, or what we would feel as cold, away from your hand on those cooler days when you were shooting off of an aluminum bow. I do like, some of the ridging and the texture that they have here. It does give me kind of a reference point for a very repeatable hand placement on the grip, and a little bit of texturing there on the back of the grip as well. That said, the grip profile itself it's a little rounded for my preference. That said, minor detail. There is a relatively kind of maybe half-inch flat shooting surface there on the back. Should be fairly repeatable. It's not the most kind of ergonomic grip that I've seen, and it's also not really kind of target style. It lives somewhere in between. I think it'll be agreeable for most archers, but maybe not my exact preference. Okay, so now we can talk about stabilizers. They do have pretty traditional stabilizer mounting. They have one position here, which is directly underneath the grip itself, and then on the back they do have this tapped and threaded for a lower V-bar or back bar mount, if that is your preference as well. Talking for a moment about roller guard, this is a solid piece of aluminum. Really no adjustment coming out of that, but seems to be incredibly kind of rock solid and durable. So relatively standard compared to what we're seeing again from most manufacturers in the industry. And then strings and cables. So I'll be honest, I have limited experience shooting Prime. I certainly have almost no experience shooting them for any duration of time, so I can't really speak to the quality of these strings and cables. That said, I know in years past, they had been offering what they were calling unlimited free strings and cables for life, I believe for the original owners of the bows. So every 2 years, you could actually send your bow in and receive new strings and cables. So, a really nice feature that should save you some money over the kind of total lifetime ownership of the bow, if they're still offering that. I would encourage you to ask your local pro shop, if you're interested in this bow, if that's still a feature that's available from Prime for this year. All right, so all in, that is our review of the Prime Form for 2025. A really compelling and different offering, again, with some carbon technology here in the riser, and then those machined aluminum pieces as well. One thing that's interesting that I would speculate on, I'll be curious to see if in the future they kind of carry this technology forward, this AST hybrid carbon and aluminum technology forward, and if what they end up doing is actually just changing the length of these carbon rods to give you different axle to axle lengths and effectively different bows. while saving quite a bit of money for them from a manufacturing perspective as far as individual pieces that they could attach to those, or maybe even reusing those pieces but just extending those bars, again, to accomplish those different axle-to-axle measurements. It'll be interesting to see if that plays out in the future. One thing I did want to do also before leaving, I had noticed actually when I was downloading the initial video from the intro clip for this particular bow, I had actually picked it up on the hand scale off of making contact with the table, and I think we may have gotten an incorrect total weight measurement for the bow. So I want to redo that, not allowing it to touch the table, to see where this bow actually comes in on our hand scale. So we will re-perform that now. And yeah, this bow is coming in a little bit lighter than we had originally tested it at 4.28 pounds. So that will be our go-forward weight measurement for this actual bow. And again, all of that coming to you for $1,595. If you like this review, please, I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and come back and visit us for some of our other bow reviews. I'm going to continue looking into longer axle-to-axle hunting bows for 2025, ultimately arriving at a best of, where we look through all of the different metrics and the ways that we analyze these bows and try to tell you what we believe is the best bow for 2025. Hope you'll join us for the next one. Thanks so much.